Hello, everyone, and hello, Lindsay. Nice to see you again.
Hi,
Always such a,
Richard.
it's always such a pleasure to have you and with us and to sort of get to talk to you. I absolutely enjoy and relish the times that we get together to chat, especially about our favorite topic, right?
Yeah, we can never talk enough about languages. Thank you so much for having me. And hello, everybody who's watching this later. And really excited to chat with you guys today, somewhat.
Well, you know what, this is a really nice opportunity because, and just to sort of set the scene, this recording and this interview really is more to do with a friend of mine who is having a conference right now in Iran for Iranian language lovers. And her name's Maya, and she spoke at the Polyglot conference last year. And she asked all of the people who follow in Iran lots of questions about who they would love to hear from. And they all said, Lindie. And then they put down lots of questions that they have for you. And so this will be a conversation based on all of those questions. I think
Fantastic.
some of them will be ones that you've answered lots of times before. Some of them may be a bit different. So let's see how we get on. And
excellent.
I think whatever you say, everyone's going to love it anyway, Lindy.
You're always so kind. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, very happy to be here. Thanks.
It's true. And I'm going to see, you'll see in the comments, everyone's going to agree with me. So.
Oh, dear.
So, people always ask this question of people who learn multiple languages. How on earth do you get into learning so many languages?
How do you get into it, or how do you sort of stay in learning multiple languages?
I guess probably both. How do you, what sparks this story of a polyglot, and why does that happen?
Think these days, with the proliferation of language learning content online, a lot of people are approaching it from, there is a thing called a polyglot and I want to be one. And that's an intimidating place to start from, because it's a high standard to move towards. It's a very lofty goal to have. It's not impossible. That's not how some of the older generation of polyglots started. It comes very case by case. Like, we meet someone who speaks one language, we befriend them, we become interested in that. We hear a song, we want to learn that. And over time, slowly, we're starting to add languages. I really think that the concept of internet polyglots is a new one, where people approach it from, how many languages can I learn right now? At least for me and many people that I know, it was more of, okay, I learned one language at school. My friends spoke that language. My parents speak this language. And it just comes over time, very slowly. For me, it's been a process of 12 or 13 years of serious language learning. And I think that's what people don't see when they see a video of you or something. They think, oh my gosh, this person speaks 10 languages, but they don't see it's a very, very, very long journey. And every language has a different story. I thought for many years that I would never learn Spanish. And I think there's probably a video of me on my channel somewhere where I said, I'm never going to learn Spanish. It's too similar to French and I don't really care about it. And I'm completely changed. I'm obsessed with Spanish now. So you never say never. And a lot of these things kind of just are happy accidents rather than a planned progression of language learning.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because obviously you released that video with Robin McPherson, and we went through the languages you have in common, and you had Spanish as one of the languages in there that you used for the interview. So, hey, never say never, right?
Yeah, that's true.
How did it feel doing that? I mean, practicing all of those languages, how is it for sort of generally to use all of the languages? Are there languages that you wish you could practice more?
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes from societal or outside pressure. So for instance, I live in Singapore, and even though it's a Chinese speaking country, everything can be done in English. But I have this guilt that I feel I should be improving my Chinese. I should be using it every single day. So in that sense, I do wish I could be practicing my Chinese more. Every other language is pretty easy to find opportunities to practice it online. And I mean, specifically about the video I did with Robin, it was it wasn't scary, but it was vulnerable and a little intimidating because I haven't been learning Spanish for that long and my French is very rusty. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with language content creators to perform and show that they, prove their languages. I don't really see the point in proving. Like, I'm more about sharing progresses and struggles. So in that sense, it was a little intimidating to practice languages that I might be rusty in or a beginner in. But I think it's good to create this content that's like very honest.
I think you did a really good job, and like exactly, you reached what you wanted to reach in that, in terms of sharing. And I think that's one of the things that many people appreciate about you, is that you're very transparent in what you do, and you're very real. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's being tangible to people, not being some sort of etherical being that's, you can't really fully get, or you think that maybe everything's perfect. You show all of the lumps and bumps in the journey, right? Which is,
thanks for saying that.
No, it's true. And I think it's that makes people particularly like you. So it's a very nice quality to have.
Thank you. Same for you.
No, thank you. And I mean, the languages that you've got now, because you've got a lot, and we said, some languages get rusty and things like that. But be honest, as a language enthusiast, and I know I follow you on Twitter, I follow you in quite a few places. There's got to be that language list, right? There's a language dream. Okay, there's a language dream list. Let's not talk about the language dream list, because we could just make an entire video about that.
Yeah.
But are there realistically languages that you've got just now you're thinking, no, I really do want to study those?
Okay, like languages that I don't speak yet but want to. Oh, so many. I mean, I've learned Arabic to a very basic conversational level in reading and writing, but I can't speak it. Really, I can't. So I would love to improve my Arabic. And with that, like maybe languages that are similar, Farsi or Urdu even would be fantastic. And also because Afrikaans, my home language, is a Germanic language, I think it would be fun to just add Dutch, German, Swedish, Norwegian. Those would be maybe an easy ticket to more languages, but I haven't yet seen a direct need for that in my language life right now. And I just don't know what it is with Hungarian that I am absolutely in love with this language. And the last time I felt this way about a language was Korean. It's just like everything I do, I'm absolutely enamored and obsessed with this language. And it's very rare to come across a language that I feel that way about. So it is a language I'm learning now, but I really hope to be able to learn it to fluency.
I love that. I love that you're in Singapore and you're learning this language in sort of Central Europe that's spoken.
It doesn't make sense.
No, well, it does beg the question, and one of the questions that people asked from Iran, and it begs the question: how do you practice some of these languages? I mean, how do you get to? Because like a language like Hungarian, Chinese, Korean, Japan, you're in Asia, you're kind of that way,
right?
Over in that part of the world, so you can kind of see those, and also they're pretty in terms of numbers of speakers as well, and media that you get around the world. They're pretty big in those terms.
Yeah.
But then Hungarian, like how would you fit that in? How do you practice these languages?
Yeah. One of the questions I get asked the most is, how do you find resources or people for minority language or lesser learned languages? And it's really about being resourceful. It exists somewhere. You just have to put in a lot of extra work to find it. There's a ton of forums online. There are some content creators who have Patreons where they post podcasts with transcripts. I support a friend of mine. Her content is Hungarian with Cici, and she posts a podcast and a transcript every month. And I mean, that's not someone or something you're going to find if you just Google how to learn Hungarian, right? You have to do a bit of digging to find maybe people who create content. And as we all know, there's a ton of amazing language exchange apps out there. Tandem, Hello Talk, forums online, Facebook groups. And it does take a lot of effort and work to find the right language partner. But once you've found someone to stick with, that helps. For me, I know that it can sometimes be expensive as well, but just getting a tutor, like italki has a ton of tutors in a wide variety of languages. And if that's something you can afford or you have time for, I would also recommend getting a tutor, because you might not be able to find textbooks or apps for those languages, but there will be someone online somewhere who speaks it. So I don't actually have a single textbook for Hungarian. I do have one, but I don't use it ever, and it's not great. So it's entirely possible to learn a language without a textbook. Right. And once you've gotten past the basics, like maybe taking a few lessons with a tutor, or reading through transcripts or working from an app or a textbook, once you have those basics down, you can push yourself to engage with native content. So I try and read articles in Hungarian about things I'm interested in. And I know I say this all the time and it's such standard advice, but that's really how I learn. It's super difficult. I have to push myself to work through one piece of content over and over to understand it. But that's what I have to do if there are no other materials available.
Yeah, you work with what you've got, right?
Yeah.
That makes complete sense to me as well. I definitely concur. You mentioned in your sort of list of languages you would be interested in learning Farsi. And I'm sure there'll be a number of people in Iran listening to this saying, Lindie, if you want to help with, I don't think you're going to have any problems with resources for Farsi, to be honest with you. So, I mean, is that something that's sort of in the near future for you? Is that something you see yourself doing soon?
Oh, Richard, I wish I could learn every language at once. I had some lovely Iranian friends at school when I lived in Dubai, and I think Iran is just an incredibly country, very rich in history and art and language. So it's definitely something I would be interested in. Unfortunately, being completely honest, there's no time at the moment. And practically, I think it does make sense to just get all of the other languages I'm learning just to a bit of a higher level before I expand out. So it's maybe a future dream.
Watch this space thing.
Yes, watch this space.
Watch this space. And I mean, you touched on this just now. You do have lots of other languages, and I'm guessing you have to work as well. So you have your job, you have to eat and live, right? You're human like the rest of us, I suppose. So
oh dear, have to eat. What a waste of time.
How do you manage all of this stuff? Because I mean, you've got a lot of things going on. What does your day look like? Typical Lindie day. What's a Lindie day like?
So I have a language planner where I try and track what I do weekly. So I might set up mini challenges for myself. So this week specifically, I've decided that because I don't have enough time or motivation to have a very set schedule. For instance, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. study from a textbook, 10 a.m. listen to a podcast, 11 a.m. start work. I can't do that. My weeks are too inflexible and I'll get bored. So what I do at the end of the week, like on a Sunday, I'll try and look at how much time I have for the upcoming week and set mini challenges for myself. So right now I'm working through all of the audio lessons on Speakly for Spanish. And I sort of track what's the episode I listened to on which day. And that way I have just a mini, very small goal, even if it's just 15 minutes of language learning each day. So that would be a weekly thing. If I'm at work, I try and do a lot of my actual work in another language. So a lot of what I do is design, and I'm really interested in marketing and startups. So I've signed up for all Google's newsletters in different languages. They have a newsletter called Think with Google, and it's about marketing. And every day I'll get Think with Google's Spanish, French, traditional Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. So I'm constantly seeing languages that relate to my daily life in my inbox, the music I listen to, and so forth. And then if I zoom out and look at more of a monthly thing or quarterly, I try and set goals for myself for every few months of focus languages. It's impossible to say all of the 12, 13, whatever languages I'm learning every single day. I have to do something. So I choose focuses or foci, like for the next 3 months, I'm going to do mainly Hungarian and Spanish. And after that, I'll go back to Korean. So I can't do everything at the same time. I have to prioritize.
Wow, it's nice to hear you are human. Yes. I guess, I think that's the thing when people sort of hear all of these languages, it does. I get this question too. So it's nice to sort of hear you break it down that way. I wish I had your organizational skills. That's all I'm saying. Looking at that planner and seeing you on Twitter and you've got, these are my goals. I was like, wow. I wish I could.
The problem is seeing them through and sticking to them. It helps to have goals, but I'm learning the hard way that you shouldn't set them too high if you also have 3 full-time jobs.
Well, all I'll say is I wish I could spend the day in your head, so that I can kind of go through that and get it and get the idea better. I'm definitely a bit more of a Balkan boy when it comes to my goals. So I guess I set goals because I know that I need to have an idea in my head, but at the same time, kind of this Balkan, it can whenever. I've
But
picked a lot of the culture.
I'd love to ask you more because you have a much wider range of languages that you speak at much higher levels than I do. How do you, Richard, maintain them?
So I use anchor languages. So I have strong languages in each language group, and my main focus has always been on Romance, Germanic, and Slavic languages. And so I have specific languages in those groups that I use more often than others. But what I find is because they're related, my brain is thinking of the other languages while I'm using the other ones. And so I find that they don't disappear too quickly.
That makes sense.
The only real exceptions are languages like, if I learn two that are very similar, like I studied Slovak for a specific reason. I went to the Polyglot Gathering and took part in a language learning challenge. And so I studied it intensively for a few weeks. And because I spoke Czech and studied Czech at university in Prague, I found I could already understand Slovak, so it wasn't an issue for understanding it. It was just learning to speak it actively. But what happens is because I learned it so quickly and because I never used it, it sort of went back into my Polish and Czech. So I would need to use it over a long period of time to retain it. Similar thing happened with Norwegian. It went back into my Swedish after I did my challenge, and I could probably say things and I still understand them, but it's not really like they're not really languages that stay. But then other ones, like for example, Catalan or languages like that, where they're similar to Spanish in that they're related, but then they've got elements that when I speak Italian, I'm reminded of them as well, kind of how I do it. And then lucky in that where I am in the Balkans, lots of languages are spoken. So
you're constantly hearing them around you.
And they tend to be the languages I don't use for work. So I don't use Serbian or Bulgarian or Macedonian, or even Turkish really, or anything like that for work. So I get to practice those as just like fun things I do. Sometimes I've used them for work, but not very often.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit less.
Thanks for sharing.
I always find my story a little bit more boring.
No, definitely not. But I think the same about myself. But I think it's like we live with ourselves. Like that's all that we know and experience. And it's always interesting to hear from other people and see how we do things differently.
Yeah, it was always the thing as well. This is why it sort of fascinates me when you say you want to get to Hungarian at a very high level, because I've always been quite practical in terms of I know what I can use where I am, and that's why it always interests me. I think that's changed now because of the internet and the way we've become more connected virtually, especially after this last year and a half. It's got to a point where I think taking languages that are not necessarily in your direct community is more doable, because if you make those connections with people, they can actually be quite strong without physically being in that place.
Yeah, we're very, very lucky to have the online language community now. I mean, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's grown so much.
Yeah, it has, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I would have sort of been thinking before when you said Hungarian and wanting to learn to a high level, I was thinking, what on earth are you going to do with that in Singapore? But now it makes more sense than it ever did.
Yeah, definitely.
I've gone through this year with learning Cornish. I never thought I'd really learn Cornish. And then a friend of mine said, "Oh, do you want to learn Cornish?" And I was like, I'm taking advantage this year of all of the languages I would never normally study, and taking
Amazing.
courses that have gone online where I'd
Yeah.
never really got the chance to learn them, right? And for some reason, I've really taken to Cornish, and I now have these conversation groups that I go to regularly, and I love it. It's fantastic.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So the one thing that, speaking about Cornish, and yesterday I was on one of my calls in Cornish, and Welsh words come into my head because it's related. So you must have this too. How do you deal with this sort of mixing of languages?
Mm-hmm. Funny that you asked, because I had a very similar situation yesterday. I was speaking to a friend from Luxembourg, and we have 5 languages in common, or Afrikaans and Dutch 4. And he has a very strong French accent when he speaks Spanish. And my main cue for being able to switch between languages is hearing it. I have to hear or read out loud a language to sort of switch my mind on into that mode. So it's not difficult for me to switch between French and Spanish, Korean, whatever. I just have to hear it. But it was quite difficult for me yesterday, because as my friend was speaking Spanish, if I, close my eyes and listen with half an ear, it almost sounds like he's speaking French. So when I replied to him, I found myself throwing in French words by accident, because I'm so tuned into the auditory stuff. So I wouldn't say that people often ask, do you mix languages? No, not in the sense that I'm speaking to you now in English and Afrikaans. Like it doesn't happen like that. It's more of like filler words or small things that I might accidentally throw in if my ears are not tuned into the right place. So for me, it's a lot based on audio. And if I have to sort of get into the mode of something. So let's say a month ago, I was doing a few TV interviews in Hungarian. I had to prep myself fully by creating a Hungarian immersed environment for me in order to not accidentally throw in Spanish or Korean. So I put all of my Korean, Spanish, whatever on hold for those 2 or 3 weeks that I was engaging with Hungarian media. Everything I listened to was Hungarian. Everything I read was Hungarian, just to constantly have my mind in that space. I don't know if that's the same for you or if you resonate with that, but for me, it's definitely easier not to switch languages if my mind kind of is attuned to hearing it often.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Just thinking, I wish I'd had a few weeks to go through listening to just Estonian and blocking out all of the languages before I went on live on Monday. But on Estonian TV, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. But, I had been learning it intensively for a month, so it's kind of similar. I just hadn't blocked out anything else. So I definitely didn't get a chance to sort of just focus, ready for the interview. But that's definitely a help, I think, when you're trying to, especially with new languages or languages that you're still very much in sort of the learning stages for. Not that we ever finished learning, but it's, you know what I mean. It's kind of, some of them you need a lot more attention, right, to sort of just keep them balanced.
Yeah, definitely.
It is. It's kind of like a balancing act. I always feel like I'm sort of walking in a room with a book on my head.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor.
Yeah. I'm hoping it won't fall on the floor. Yeah. I mean, learning all of these languages and sort of keeping them all up and doing this stuff, it can definitely be challenging. There's no 2 ways about it. But it does give you a lot of really cool feelings, right? When you go through it, when you sort of meet with your friends and speak to them. How does it make you feel speaking these languages?
It's so rewarding. And I think it helps if you remove the expectations and pressure. If I were to say to myself, whenever I practice Spanish, I have to be perfect or make no mistakes, it's not going to feel nice. But when I go to a Spanish language conversation exchange with my friends and we're all practicing together, I feel, wow, we're connecting, we're bonding over a mutual interest, we're learning from each other. When you change your mindset from striving towards perfection to seeing it as a fun hobby, an opportunity to learn and grow, then it is so incredibly rewarding. And I think overall languages are just so enriching. And I mean, Catalan has been quoted so many times on this that learning language is the only thing worth doing imperfectly, you know, something like that. The only thing worth knowing poorly. And even if you just know a few words, it's going to change your life. But it really goes hand in hand with your mindset.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that, you know, obviously it's something that's quoted a lot, and I've quoted her myself with that, because it's true. It is the only thing worth knowing, even poorly, because, well, try and think of anything else. I mean, being a doctor, knowing medicine, even poorly, isn't really exactly wins, right? There aren't many things, you know, being an engineer, being a builder, and doing it only poorly. Can you imagine? Instead of through, whereas just being able to say, you know, like 2 glasses of water, please.
Yeah.
You know, it's still a helpful thing, and it can get you out of a tight spot.
Yeah.
If you're in
we had a new engineer join at work today, and he's Korean, and he's not very confident in his English yet. And I don't think he knew I spoke Korean. So I just sent him a message in Korean, and I said, hey, welcome to the team. I'm here if you ever want to ask any questions. I've been learning Korean for a while, so feel free to speak to me in Korean anytime. And he was so thankful. He said, that's awesome. I'm so glad to have someone in the company who speaks Korean, because I'm still focusing on my English. And that's not to diminish his English skills or not give him an opportunity to speak English. Of course, we should be encouraging and helping people. But I think it just sort of formed a bond. You know, we're all working remotely. We can't see each other in person. And now we have this like new work relationship or friendship that's being connected by a mutual language that we have in common.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really nice story. I think it's really nice that you just reached out in that way. It's kind of a non-threatening way. It's I'm here if you need me, and you can use whichever language you want. I think that's a really nice way to go about it. And this is actually the way that you said that just now. It reminds me of the question that I think we often get, or people can talk about. Practicing languages with people, especially in your own country, in your own space. You're in Singapore, so it can be a little bit different, because it's kind of not necessarily your own home ground. People say to me, do you just speak to foreigners in their own languages when you're in the UK? And I'm like, absolutely not. No, I would offer if they want the help. But there's a language etiquette that goes on, right, as well. And I always say, you know, if you want to speak, then you can speak. But even if somebody speaks, say, I don't know, I've had a friend once who was a Spanish speaker, and she'd come to the UK to learn English. And I thought, if I speak to her in Spanish, it's not really fair. My Spanish was better than her English. Of course, she'd only just started learning English. But speaking to her in Spanish and sort of supposing that she's going to respond to that, how would she feel? You know, it's putting yourself in their position. And I thought, I'm just going to speak to her in English. And in fact, I did. And her English improved over time. But she'd come to my country to learn the language that I speak. And so there is this kind of, there's this etiquette. And it's nice the way you went about that. It reminds me of those kinds of experiences of this, just being mindful of the people and where they're coming from.
Yeah, it's definitely situational as well, because of course we as language learners want practice, but we can't always be in a get mindset. We also have to give. It's definitely a give and take, because if I never give people opportunities to practice their English or Afrikaans with me, and I'm always trying to steal their time for them to help me with their languages, nobody else is going to be learning except me. So it's definitely, there's unspoken etiquette, and it's a give and take for sure.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear you say that. And I think it's probably one of the things that shines through with you that just makes people like you. So I'm glad that you do that as well. It's really, really nice. I would have been surprised if you didn't, to be honest. I shouldn't assume, but I just guessed you'd be a nice person in that respect as well. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the languages we learn in our plans. If you could go back to kind of the beginning when you first started learning languages, all those years ago, you know, what would you say to your younger self? Would you give yourself advice?
Yeah. I'm thinking back at school. I mean, I was quite exposed to languages through my family. You know, I went to English schools. We spoke Afrikaans at home. We lived in France for a bit. I just saw that as a normal part of life. But once I got to school subject languages, like doing French and Arabic at school, I always just saw that as a school subject. And I wish I could tell myself to, number one, enjoy it more, and number two, appreciate it more. But I think that's largely dependent on the curriculum. I think the way they teach languages, I mean, I haven't been in school for a long time, so it could be different, but the way I was taught languages at school was not the most conducive environment. But if I had taken what I had and worked with it and tried a bit more to practice and use my languages, I wouldn't regret losing those languages a lot. As for anything outside of school languages, I don't have any regrets. I would just tell myself to be patient with myself and be confident. It took me many, many years to feel confident in making mistakes and feel confident in sharing my languages and feel confident in talking to people. That came with time. I had to put myself in difficult situations to grow, but I kind of wish I could go back and tell my teenage self, like, just relax. Like, people are not going to laugh at you. You don't need to be perfect. Just take it easy. It's not the end of the world.
Sounds very sensible. I think, you know, that kind of advice, I think, like you said, you grow into it. And sometimes there is no, like with language learning, there's no forcing some of these issues. It's a developmental thing, isn't it? I mean, psychologically, we sort of go through lots of experiences. So it's good that you sort of say that, you know, don't worry, I like that. Don't worry, be happy kind of message. It's very nice. But if you were to go sort of with all of the experience sort of you've had now as well, and you were to meet somebody else, how would that advice change? Would you give people more structured pointers as to what you've done, if them to learn from what you've done? How would you go about that kind of advice?
Maybe you can help me reframe the question more specifically. Would this be a sort of practical language learning advice as to where you start, or?
Yeah, so somebody wanting to learn this, they look at Lindie and they say, Lindie speaks all of these languages. What do I need to do? How do I get on that path? What do I need to do?
Yeah. I think it's important to realize that everybody has a different method that works for them. There's no cookie cutter single path map that works for everyone. I can give my suggestions that are, I mean, everything I say on my YouTube channel is full of advice and tips for people. And I have a few videos about, you know, what I've learned about learning languages, or things I wish I knew before I started learning languages. So I can't think of something extremely specific at the top of my head, because I do share this online a lot. But I would say overall, don't be afraid to just start. I find that a lot of people look for the perfect method and resources first, and then they want to start and make sure that their path, they're almost like sweeping the leaves off the long trail and then going back to the start to begin, instead of just looking at the mess you have in front of you and slowly working your way through and fixing stuff. And I bring this up a lot. I work in a lot of startups, and we have what we call the agile methodology. And that means we work in sprints of 2 weeks at a time. We release a feature, and then we have a retrospective to go back, look at what we've done. What did we do well? What can we do better? And what are we going to change? We don't plan for the entire year, do a whole thing, then release it and hope it works out. We're constantly changing our progress as we go along. And I think that's a good mindset for language learners to have, that I'm going to start with what I have. Even if it's wrong, it's difficult, it doesn't make sense. And I'm just going to do small bits and improve on that, instead of planning out my whole language learning journey from scratch.
Absolutely perfect answer. I think you're completely right. And like you say, I mean, these are questions that I think, particularly if once you've been through the process a few times, you get them asked again and again and again. And like you say, you've come up with so many videos and piece of advice already online. And I would strongly advise anyone listening to this to go over to see the types of things you're talking about, because I think you talk about these from so many different angles, and answering that in one question, in one answer, is just impossible. It's like, it's one of those things of, how do you learn a language? How do you learn French? How do you learn? Well, there are certain things that are constant, right? Studying regularly and being consistent. And like you say, I like that analogy of a path. I think that's a very nice one, of just worry about the leaves where you're standing right now, sweep them away first, move forward, and let the leaves that are miles away worry about themselves, because they may have blown off the path by the time you get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't know. And I think, related to those questions, and I mean, those questions are kind of questions you get very often, and in a way they actually really highlight this well, and why it's difficult to answer the second question related to, how would you advise yourself and what's your path been? Because that really shows you just how individual this journey is. So when you get to advising someone else, when you've done that retrospective, where have I come from? What have I done? How has it worked out? It makes you realize all the more that it's a very individual journey, isn't it?
It is. It's extremely personal. Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share? Any messages you'd like to share with the lovely Iranian friends of ours that have given you these wonderful questions today that we've incorporated onto our chat?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for sending in all of the questions. Thanks for your support. And I just want to extend all of my love and encouragement and good luck and good vibes for language learning. And just remember to enjoy the process. Don't get caught up in too many methods and stresses. Just take it easy and enjoy it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindie. As ever, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I knew this would be a fun conversation.
Thank you, Richard.
I always look forward to it. So I'll look forward to seeing you again and to speaking to you more.
Thank you so much.
And good luck with the next steps in your journey too.
Thank you. You too. See you around.
Everyone.